Welcome to season one of Cultura Convos, a space for reflections of identidad y cultura meant to educate, meant to inspire you, and spark those hard conversations with ourselves and then with others too. I would say, more importantly, with ourselves first. And here today, I want to talk a little bit about why this podcast and why now. For me, my why is very clear. I am passionate about identidad y cultura, and I want to help people write and rewrite their story from a place of strength. I want people to know that their identities are meant to be embraced, that there's no one thing that defines them, there's no one thing that defines you, there's no one thing that defines me, and that we can really create the life that we want. When I think of my why, I go back to my own story where I feel like it wasn't really until my 20s when I started becoming really proud of my cultural identity. And I grew up, proud of being Mexican in the sense of like, there's just so many parts of our culture that I love, whether it was like the music, whether it was like some of the stereotypes, right? Like going to parties all the time. That was definitely my mom because one, she has an amazing energy. So I feel like she always got invited to parties. And also, she was really strict with me until I left, probably until I left the house. I say that to say a lot of my weekends were going with her to birthday parties or quinceañeras or all this stuff. And that's where I think I developed a love for dance. Back to the point. My point is that it really wasn't until my 20s that I started becoming proud of my cultural identity beyond just my house, right? And really started to, rewrite things where it was realizing in my, I was at like 19 at the time, maybe 20, where I realized like, you know, being bilingual and speaking Spanglish was not something that I was supposed to try to quote unquote correct, meaning only speak one language at a time, but actually embrace and realize that, wow, how dope is it that we do this with our brains, that most of us who speak more than one language will do this, whether it's Spanish and English or English and Haitian Creole. I'm thinking of some of my friends that speak other languages, and yeah, it's really, really dope. So those little pivots and really understanding that our culture is dope. Yes, there's always room for growth, room for opportunity, things that we have to let go of. However, overall, we live and exist in a society that so often narratives dominate that put our culture down, that make many of us feel like we need to be ashamed of. Like maybe it's not something to be proud of. And it's really not the case. So, especially right now, it's a moment where I say right now in the sense of with everything happening in LA, with everything happening across not just the country, but the world, sometimes because I'm so passionate about this topic and I like to listen to things from different perspectives, and because I've been on this journey for over 10 years of really embracing my culture and being more authentic with who I am and trying to be intentional in that way, I forget that like not everyone is in that space. I still hear very ignorant comments about, our cultura. I realize that because I'm in this space, I think that everyone now feels proud of their culture, of where their parents come from, of their story. And that's not necessarily the case, which is why I think a space like this is so pivotal. And I'm really, really excited to reflect and share parts of my own story, at the same time bringing other people to share parts of their story, really to inspire you, to inspire me, and to learn together about continuing to embrace all parts of our identity and cultura. So that is my why. And why now? One, there's multiple angles to this. Why now in the sense of, from a personal journeys perspective, is one, I've been wanting to do something like this for a long time. You know, a lot of people will say, wow, like you wrote a book, like you're an author, that's awesome. And I receive that and I embrace that. And at the same time, if I ask myself, what is the one thing I wanted to do that I was scared of doing other than snorkeling, which I did twice in my life now, it's launching this podcast. and wanting to interview people, wanting to learn people's stories, wanting to dive into my own story, because as I share my story, I learn about myself and I continue to find my voice. And same, I'm inspired by you, by your story. So, that's one place. And I haven't done it for many reasons, including like today, I was like, I'm just going to do it because I have to do it before August 15th. Otherwise, I just gonna keep going and going. So not allowing perfection stop me. And then from like, thinking of God, the universe, my calling, part of my purposes in life. I feel like this is one of them in the sense of, especially with everything that is happening right now in the topic of immigration. Not that it hasn't happened. However, we're living and seeing something very different, whether you're talking about the kidnappings, the rhetoric online, all these things to me are a reminder of why a space like this to celebrate our culturas, to have conversations around identidad y cultura, to become the best version of ourselves is so important. So there's all these dominant narratives, what dominates the TV. Then there's like social media and things like that. We all live in a bubble and we have to be very intentional to get out of it. So for me, this space allows us to remember that there's strength in our stories, that there is joy, in some ways, even with everything happening in LA and across the world. But specifically right now, LA, when it comes to migration, there is also beauty of families coming together, communities coming together to really support one another and say, what can we do? Even when sometimes we feel hopeless. So for me, the why now on that aspect is even more important. And yeah, ultimately because it brings me joy. I remember the first time I told Marcel, I made a comment about wanting to start a podcast and wanting to get people's stories and wanting to do this and that, and how I was scared. And he was actually pretty shocked because and this always reminds me of Insecure, which I love Issa Rae, but I'm going to start with Issa and then go back to Marcel, because one time I heard an interview with Issa Rae. So for those of you that haven't watched Insecure, it's a great show to watch for so many reasons. And Issa Rae, writer, storyteller, actress, entrepreneur, many things. The thing is that she shares a story about how she was and I'm paraphrasing, so some of the details might be off, but essentially, she talked about how when she pitched the name Insecure, some of the people in the room were like, no, like, we don't see that. Like, they weren't sure about the name because they were like, we see this, like, confident Black women, like stepping into the room or whatever. But essentially, it was like, we see these confident Black women. We don't see like insecurity. And she said, well, that's the problem. Like, that's part of the issue. We still have insecurities. We still are insecure in many ways. And anyway, I say that as not necessarily to say that's the issue, but we're all human. The things that you may perceive about me might not be true. They're assumptions, right? And some are may be true, some aren't true. But my point here is that I've been wanting to do this for a long time, and Marcel thought it was like shocking that a person that like me that talks a lot and loves to talk and is always literally talking for a long time to multiple people was scared to just do it. Like, he's like, wait, what? You do that all the time. Like, what do you mean you're scared? And I think the fear comes from, quote unquote, saying the wrong thing, which I feel like I'm removing myself from that more and more because this is my story, my truth. At the same time, wanting to make sure I add value for people, all these things that we put pressure on for starting things. So for me, it's been the podcast. I'm sure there will be other things. For you, it might be different, but these are the types of things that it's important for us to pause and reflect to make sure that we're intentional, and, understand that there's different seasons in our lives. So thank you again for listening. That is part of my why. And I look forward to continuing and having these types of conversations. So if you haven't already, you can like this, you can add a comment, you can share it with a friend, you can click subscribe wherever it is you're listening to. And I am really, really excited, really grateful to have you listening. However, you stumbled upon or received this episode, I hope that it has already sparked some conversation with yourself, or a question or a reflection. And I think those are the things that are going to ultimately be like pivotal and transformational in our lives. So thank you. Remember, there's no one thing that defines you. Let's not allow one identity to consume us, and have a wonderful, wonderful day.